after a second sleepless night in the saddle. The raiders were moving down this road about 11 a.m. when they heard the labored approach of a locomotive. Anxious to capture it, a company of Pennsylvania troopers spurred forward. They got within about 100 yards of the railroad depot at Lovejoy Station, but no closer. You see, that train they had heard was filled with about 300 Confederate soldiers commanded by Brigadier General Dan Reynolds. Piling off the cars, they quickly formed a line of battle and opened fire with their long-barreled Enfield rifles. The Yankee troopers dismounted to fight on foot, but raked from front and flank and took staggering losses. They fell back in confusion, just as the Chicago Board of Trade battery galloped into the middle of a cornfield on the far side of that ridge and unlimbered their 4 guns. When Reynolds' 6 regiments of rebel infantry emerged from the tree line on the far edge of that field and raised their high-pitched rebel yell. Each of those guns fired 70 rounds of canister exploding shell during the next 15 minutes. Then, nearly out of ammunition, they retreated about 100 yards. There they found the rest of Kilpatrick's command had dismounted and hunkered down behind a hastily built barricade of logs and fence rails. These blue-coated troopers opened a heavy fire that checked the wild charge of the rebel infantry and drove them back into the woods on the far side of the field. But as these rebels retreated, Kilpatrick's troopers heard a new sound, the disquieting rattle of musketry coming from the rear. It was a brigade of Texas cavalry commanded by Brigadier General Saul Ross. His brigade of cavalry came dashing down this road to our right here, dismounted, and hurried out into the middle of this field in front of us, which at that time was planted with corn. Well, hit from the front by rebel infantry, and now from the rear by Ross's dismounted cavalry, Judson Kilpatrick quickly concluded, "We are surrounded." But let me tell you something, he was not about to surrender. Instead, he ordered Colonel Robert Minty to form 2 brigades on the far side of that ridge where you see those tall Leland cypresses in the distance. Minty formed 6 regiments under the shelter of this ridge. They lined up in 2 parallel rows. Each row consisted of 3 compact columns standing side by side. Each column was 4 troopers wide and anywhere from 50 to 100 ranks deep. At Minty's command, the men drew their sabers. Then a lone bugler spurred his horse to the top of that ridge. Silhouetted against the summer sky, he lifted his bugle to his lips and sounded forward. "Forward! Trot!" Minty ordered. As the first riders crested that ridge, Minty waved his saber over his head and yelled, "Gallop march! Charge!" A lusty cheer rose in the throats of his men, mingling with the brassy bugle notes of charge. This is the bugle call that actually echoed across these rolling hills exactly 142 years ago this afternoon. Boot to boot and stirrup to stirrup, Minty and his men spurred across this cornfield out in front of us here at breakneck speed. The 4th U.S. Regulars finally veered out into the road here. Ahead of them, in the shade of some walnut trees, on the top of that knoll, they could see a lone rebel howitzer manned by a gun crew from Columbus, Georgia. It blasted those blue-coated riders with double charges of canister just as fast as the sweat-stained gunners could load and fire. Men and horses pinched to the ground, writhing in agony, but those regulars kept coming. Behind that gun, Saul Ross's artillery limbers, led horses, and ambulances were crowded into the narrow confines of that road. The 4th U.S. Regulars slammed into them at a dead run, slashing viciously with their sabers. Hemmed in by high fences on both sides of the road, Men and horses, ambulances and wagons piled up in confusion. Suddenly, a terrific blast ripped through this struggling mass of humanity and horseflesh. You see, those Georgia boys had swung that howitzer around and had loosed a double load of canister into the backs of the regulars, felling friend and foe alike, and took aim at the rest of Minnie's men. Out here in this cornfield in front of us, Ross's dismounted Texas cavalrymen crouched behind hastily thrown up piles of logs and fence rails and watched the oncoming charge. Regardless of whether they lived for the next 15 seconds or the next 50 years, it was a sight they never forgot. The ground seemed to tremble with the approach of thousands of thundering hooves. The hot, smoky air shuddered with every fiery blast from the cannon's mouth. Horses screamed in agony. Men cursed and shouted. A gigantic blue wave, this irresistible charge, surged across this field, closer and closer and closer. "Here they come," someone yelled. But before those Texans could reload, those Yankee troopers were upon them, cutting down men left and right with their gleaming sabers. Kilpatrick's entire command literally hacked their way through the Confederate line. Hurrying through McDonough, they escaped across the rain-swollen South River and reached the safety of Sherman's lines 2 days later, on August the 22nd. Upon his arrival, General Kilpatrick assured Sherman he had torn up enough railroad track to disable the Macon Railroad for at least 10 days. But even as he spoke, the entire Union Army heard the shrill whistle of a rebel locomotive. Chugging into Atlanta from the south. The events that took place at Nash Farm would force Sherman to find another way to make Atlanta surrender.